It is Thursday, December 11th, 2025. Welcome, everybody, to Courtroom Insider. I'm Nate Eaton. Glad you're with us tonight. Please let us know where you're watching from. If you have any questions, if you have any comments, really excited about tonight's episode. Many of you have requested my guest over the past few months, and the timing couldn't be more perfect. Dave Cawley from KSL Podcasts is here. I've said this before, at least I've told him before, that his podcast, Cold, back in 2018 is the very first podcast I ever listened to. Maybe I was late in the game. I thought it was early in the podcasting world. You know, they were just kind of coming out, but I think at the time they were actually bigger than I thought they were. And it was Christmas. I had some time off, and I remember distinctly driving in the car to pick up something. And I turned on this podcast called Cold about the Susan Powell disappearance in Utah, and I was hooked. I could not wait until the new episodes were dropped piece by piece over the coming weeks. You remember the headlines. I pulled these from newspapers.com. They sponsor Courtroom Insider. Susan Powell, young mother of two adorable little boys, vanishes. Her husband, Josh Powell, said that he took the two boys on a camping trip in the middle of a blizzard in Utah in December, that he took them on a camping trip, and when he came home, Susan was gone. And it just got more bizarre from there. Josh was not holding news conferences pleading for his wife to return home. He was not out putting up missing posters. He was not doing things that family members of loved ones typically do when they vanish. In fact, he moved away. He left Utah, moved to Washington, and over the next few years, as Susan's family fought to find her and to keep it in the public spotlight, Josh's behavior and the behavior of his dad just became more and more bizarre. In fact, I think this is public. Keith Morrison from Dateline told me once that, and I think they reported this, that they were supposed to sit down with Josh and Steve Powell, his father, and they had gone to Washington, and they were going to do an interview with Dateline, and the time came and they didn't show up, and they kept pushing off the interview hour by hour, and it finally happened like at 2:30 in the morning or something when Josh and Steve showed up for this interview, and it was a bizarre interview. I've seen the Dateline where they were on, and it was just so weird. Well, tragically, Josh Powell ended up killing his boys, attacking them with an axe, and then taking his life and catching the home on fire on Super Bowl Sunday back in 2000. I think 2012, 2013. We'll talk about that with Dave. And that was kind of the story. That was the story that we all knew, that we all followed, that really captivated so many people. And then Dave Cawley comes along, this reporter from KSL News Radio at the time. Now, if you know anything about news radio, you know that when you listen to the radio, those reports are, 20, 30 seconds. They're quick, because people are driving to work. They're getting caught up in the morning before they're headed out to school, whatever. And Dave Cawley, who was a radio reporter, gets his hands on all of these recordings and documents that the police made public as part of their investigation. And no other media was really doing a deep dive into all these things. These things take time, more time than you can imagine. And a lot of the newsrooms have things to do. Like I have a job. Today I'll go out and I'll report stories, and we're doing Secret Santa surprises right now. I'll go do that. I have other things to do, and then Courtroom Insider is just a sliver of my job. So you've got this full-time job, as Dave did at the radio station, and he's got all this documentation. It's not like you can take a year off and get paid to do it. It's a kind of this tricky balance. And so Dave does a deep dive, and pretty much on his own time produces this podcast called Cold. And it's released in 2018, and it blows up. It surged to the top of the charts. It got millions and millions and millions and millions of downloads. He's now produced multiple other seasons focusing on other cases other than the Susan Powell case. He's done other shows, other podcasts with KSL Podcasts. In fact, because of his work, they formed kind of a podcast unit at KSL that he's now doing full time. He doesn't do radio; he does the podcast, KSL Podcast, full time. And his work is just remarkable. He knows how to tell a story without a doubt. He knows how to really pull you in and talk about the the humans, the people with feelings and emotions and families and loved ones behind all of this, all of these things that we often, sometimes far too often, as journalists forget. We just bring you the facts and we move on. Dave is able to really pull us into these stories. And so tonight we're going to talk about the Susan Powell case. It was actually this month, December of 2009, when she disappeared. So it's been 16 years, and some of the other projects that Dave is working on. So here is my interview with Dave Cawley. And joining me now, Dave Cawley from KSL Podcasts, who has done incredible work on the Susan Powell case. I can't believe it, Dave, and maybe I'd love to hear your thoughts about the fact that it's been how many years now? 16?
16. It's crazy. Yeah, since Susan Powell disappeared in 2009.
Tell me when you first got interested in covering this case. Were you working at KSL back in 2009, or was it a few years later when you picked it up?
Not at KSL. So I started my radio journalism career in 2003. I came out of the journalism program at the University of Utah, and I went to work for a radio station in a suburb of Salt Lake City called West Valley. And that's actually where Susan Powell lived and where she disappeared from. That took place again in 2009. So there's about 6 years, still pretty early in my career. My job at this other radio station was pretty much uh, bound to a desk. I didn't do a lot of out in the field recording. So, on this December morning, it was a snowy Monday. I remember it very well. In 2009, uh, the story goes Susan, her husband Josh, their two kids, Charlie and Braden, they don't show up for work. The kids don't show up at daycare. And there's a big kind of furor from family and then the police trying to figure out where this family was. It doesn't really hit the news though for a day or so. So I think it was like Tuesday going into Wednesday when we in the news media started hearing, there's this like strange situation unfolding in West Valley City. They're looking for this missing woman, and her husband says he took their two boys out camping. And of course, as I said, there'd been this huge snowstorm.
Mm-hmm.
Um, so right from the drop, I think anybody that was working in news in the Salt Lake area in Utah at that time was really curious and suspicious. Wanted to talk to the husband, Josh. There was a KUTV Channel 2 reporter who actually ambush reported, uh, like showed up, anticipated where Josh was going to be, showed up there, caught him coming out of a car, talked to him for a few minutes, and that only added to this sense of something's weird because his demeanor was just off. And that took place on the Wednesday, so 2 days into it. I was following that along, and of course we can get into obviously where the story went. I think a lot of people know the main beats of that, but I went to work for KSL, where I work now, in 2012, right after the probably major event that most people remember this case for, which is Josh Powell killing himself and the two kids up in Washington State. And about a year into my time at KSL, so in early 2013, we got word that the West Valley City Police Department was basically out of leads. They had explored every avenue that they had in this case, and they were going to make a public release of their case file because there had been so much media attention. There had been, open records requests, all that kind of thing. And that really was the start of me going kind of obsessive crazy in
Yeah.
digging into this case, something I think you're familiar with through your own reporting experience. You get just a fascination with understanding why this case took the turns that it did. You get to know some of the people involved, and you sense that there's, a bigger story there than maybe even it appeared on the surface. So that kind of sets the stage for what then became the Cold podcast. We released season 1 of Cold in 2018, and it was in retrospect a kind of absurdly detailed look at that case from beginning to modern day over the course of 18 primary hour-long episodes and then 10 or so bonus episodes. We've just dug into every little facet that we could find.
You say absurdly, but I would say fascinating because that is, I think I've told you before, that is the first podcast I ever listened to. And it took me some time to really I saw that it was like trending, and on Apple it was suggesting. I listened to it, and I thought I knew the story, like, oh, Susan Powell, yeah, she disappeared, and the husband probably did it. And then I listened to episode one. I'm like, holy cow, you can't get enough of it, which to me is really good programming and good journalism, because you can't wait for the next episode. And so between 2009 and 2012, wasn't it her family that was kind of keeping the story alive and pressuring Josh to talk?
There were some really interesting dynamics that were taking place during that time. So you have this event, Susan's disappearance, that is mostly being watched by the local Utah news media for the first couple of weeks. But Josh has roots in Washington State. Like, his family is mostly up in Washington. And within 2 weeks of Susan disappearing, his wife, Josh, goes to the bank. He takes out all the money from her 401k, and he basically tells the West Valley City Police Department, I'm done talking to you. And he hightails it to Washington, where his dad lives, with the two boys. And that was another one of those, I think, elements to the story that just really made people go, wait a minute, that's not what somebody does when their significant other just vanishes, right? He should be here actively involved in looking for her, and he's showing just none of that.
Hmm.
As a result of that, the law enforcement up in Washington State and Pierce County, around the suburbs of Tacoma, they start getting involved. There are efforts by the local police here in Utah to get child welfare services to check in on Josh, and the story kind of starts growing. There are some religious aspects to this. As we kind of uncovered in the podcast, or talked about in the podcast, Josh and his wife Susan had been at odds over religion. When they had met and married, they were both active members of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. Josh had subsequently kind of fallen away from that, and Susan was trying to bring him back. And this was a major point of conflict for their marriage. And so Josh becomes increasingly hostile toward the religious community in Utah that was really active in trying to, help find Susan. So she has friends here, neighbors here. They organized a Facebook group, and they created kind of this alliance with Susan's family, her parents in Washington, all, as you said, trying to put pressure on Josh to, cooperate, to talk. And that over time got worse and worse and worse. In basically the end of 2011 or late summer 2011, it's to the point where Susan's dad and Josh's dad are having shouting matches against each other on the street in public, in front of news cameras in Washington State. And we didn't realize it at the time. I say we in the news media, but also we in the public. But at that moment, police were actually kind of fanning the flames, trying to get Josh and his dad and the rest of his family to talk, because they had gone to court and obtained a wiretap so they could listen in on Josh's phone calls, hoping that he would, give information about where Susan might be or what he had done to her. And that didn't, unfortunately, lead them to any conclusion. And it was only a few months before the child welfare case in Washington, where Josh had lost custody of his kids. He was trying to get them back. There was a pretty, again, contentious court hearing where Josh was accused of some things involving child sexual abuse material. And he, after coming out of court that day, basically set a plan in motion, as I said, to, murder his kids and kill himself in a pretty horrific act of violence in Washington.
Do you think, looking back now and in your reporting and in speaking with investigators and police, that Josh could have been arrested before then? I mean, did they have enough to hold him on something? Obviously, hindsight's 2020, armchair quarterbacking, whatever you want to call it. But had he been in custody, those children might still be alive.
I've heard a lot of different perspectives on that question. Susan's dad, Chuck Cox, in one of our very early conversations, he told me he believed, knowing Josh the way he did, that had the West Valley City Police Department arrested Josh at the outset, that once Josh was in jail, he would have cracked. He would have, told whatever to save his skin. I've heard other perspectives from members of law enforcement who, again, interviewed him. I mean, they interrogated Josh for hours the day after Susan came up missing. And, they describe him as being one of these people that it doesn't matter how much pressure you apply, he is not going to talk. I tend to be of the mind that Josh had he had a narcissistic streak, and I don't mean that in the kind of pop culture term. He was evaluated by a psychologist prior to the murder suicide in Washington, and they actually identified that he had narcissistic personality disorder or aspects of it. So, in his own mind, I believe he really justified and rationalized killing Susan in a way that he felt no guilt. He felt no need to absolve himself. So, no amount of pressure that you applied to him was going to get his guilty conscience to elicit some, confession. Could the kids have been saved is also a very delicate question because, very clearly one of the things that came out from the reporting in the podcast, Nate, was, Josh's dad, Steve, kept voluminous journals through this entire saga. And I'm talking all the way from when, Josh and Susan got married through their entire relationship till after the disappearance. And he ended up in prison on some other charges and was actually writing during that time too. And right from the drop, when Susan disappeared, Steve Powell, Josh's dad, was writing in his journal, well, I always thought if one of my kids was capable of murder, it was going to be Josh. And my big concern is that, if he gets his back to the wall, that he might do something to the boys, my grandsons. So very clearly there was a sense, even among Josh's inner circle, that he was capable of doing that kind of violence. The chief investigator on the case for West Valley City told me at one point that, he believed Josh executing a plan to kill the boys would have happened regardless. Maybe it wouldn't have been, at the home that he rented in Washington during this court authorized visitation, which is what occurred, but maybe he would have, tried to firebomb the foster home that they were in, something like that. And ultimately that's speculative. We'll never know. I think given the fact that Josh killed the boys the way he did and the high likelihood that he killed Susan, near certainty that he killed Susan, he clearly had the means and the intent to cause that kind of harm.
And when his children were murdered, it was clearly well thought out and well planned. That was an episode on the Cold podcast, which if you haven't listened, go back and listen to season 1 of Cold, because it was very eye opening to listen to and hear these details. But the one episode that I still remember to this day is when the social worker, the case agent, whoever goes over to pick up the kids from their dad, and he doesn't let her in the house. And then you play the audio of the 911 calls, and in a way it's kind of infuriating to hear how the dispatchers respond, and also knowing what's coming. And wasn't that like on Super Bowl Sunday?
It was, yeah, February 5th of 2012, Super Bowl Sunday. It's funny, you started our conversation asking, was I working at KSL at the time? So I was between jobs, basically. I was leaving my first radio job before coming to KSL. And, the way KSL works, it's a lot larger news operation. And I think had I been at KSL, it would have been rushed to the station. As it was, I was kind of sitting at home, absorbing it coming through the TV. We didn't break in on the radio station that I worked on prior to coming to KSL as much with breaking news. And so it was, I experienced that the way I think a lot of people did, which was seeing the alerts coming over the TV here in Utah, breaking into, pre-Super Bowl coverage about here's this house on fire in Washington and it's connected to Josh Powell. And we're learning that there are multiple bodies inside, and just this like sinking feeling of this is the worst possible outcome. And it seems like we all kind of saw it coming, right? Like all of this lead up to that horrific event felt avoidable. But yeah, it raised all those questions, right? Why did the judge allow Josh to have the kids at his house with just this visitation supervisor being the one ferrying them back and forth? Why wasn't that a secure location? Why had the police not arrested Josh right from the drop? And there are reasons for that, as you kind of indicated or asked. The West Valley City Police Department, they wanted to arrest Josh. That's one of the things that I learned talking to the detectives in this case, is they very clearly viewed him as the suspect. They believed he murdered Susan. And their evidence, while circumstantial, was beginning to rise to the level that they were heading toward making an arrest, even in a nobody case. But in those early days, there was a lot of fear that if they arrested Josh, the Salt Lake County District Attorney, the prosecuting agency, wouldn't file charges.
Mm.
And so by law, they could have tossed Josh in jail, but after 3 days, the jail would have had to let him loose if there were no criminal charges filed. And at that point, Josh's uh, actions, he would be very clearly aware that he is the suspect. And so they were trying to play this game of, well, let's treat Josh like he's not the suspect. Let's let him lead us to the body. So we'll do things like put a GPS tracker on his car. We'll go serve a search warrant at his house and, try to find evidence there. And just through a sheer string of bad luck, but also a few oversights on the part of the West Valley City Police Department in those early days, I think they missed some opportunities that could have brought them kind of over that hump to the point where they would have had hopefully enough to find Susan and arrest Josh. And the fact that that didn't happen leaves us where we are today, 16 years later.
So, Dave, on that 911 tape, when the case worker is trying to get to the kid, she's frantic, she's worried, and then the dispatcher, I think the firefighters couldn't find the house or something, and there was a lot
Yeah.
of confusion, and you're infuriated listening to that, knowing get there, get there. What ended up happening? Didn't Susan's family end up suing the department, or there was an investigation? Remind me what ended up happening as the result of that situation.
Yeah, your memory's right. Both are true. So anytime there's a death of children who are under state supervision in the state of Washington, it triggers an inquest. And so there was an inquest that took place immediately after the murder suicide in 2012, where Washington State's Child Welfare Agency, the court, all of that record got preserved and examined, and there were some findings from the state of Washington internally about here's what maybe we can change to do things better. There was some legislation that was run in Utah and in Washington. It didn't pass in Washington, but it did in Utah. And that law that passed in Utah basically says if you have a child custody situation where one of the parents is a suspect, even if they're not criminally charged, if they're a suspect in wrongdoing about the other parent, then we need to prioritize safety of the kids over the parental rights. That was the tension that Washington State was dealing with. Josh had not been criminally charged. He's clearly a suspect, but he's got parental rights. And so, do you deny him those parental rights and open yourself up to a lawsuit from Josh Powell for denying him his kids? Or do you hold the kids back out of fear of safety, right? So, they're trying to make that balance. We know ultimately that Josh killed the kids. That balance wasn't properly found. And Susan's parents filed a mega millions lawsuit against the state of Washington. It took a long time to go anywhere. But in early 2020, they finally were able to bring it before a judge. I was there in Tacoma for the opening days of this trial. They wanted a jury trial. Basically, they wanted a jury to decide whether the state had been negligent in its handling of Charlie and Braden while they were under state protective custody. And a little thing called COVID happened. So with just a few days into that trial, we all kind of went into isolation. We went home. And several weeks later, the court reconvened, but it was one of the first that I'm aware of cases, trials that was really done remotely. So all the witnesses were being beamed in over, Zoom or whatever system that the court used there. I followed it from home, as a member of the media. And ultimately, the jury, after hearing all the evidence, found in favor of Susan's parents, saying that the state of Washington had been negligent, that the deaths of Charlie and Braden were preventable, and they awarded Susan's parents roughly $100 million as a reward in that lawsuit.
Wow. I think one of the most eye-opening things about this series you did is the how disgusting, I guess you could say, Josh's dad was. And you mentioned the child sex abuse material, serving time for that, for having a lot of people. That's child pornography. That's kind of the common term, but also the fact that he was kind of obsessed with Susan and like romantically attracted to her and wrote about this and saved like her hair, didn't he? Like real personal type things. Even wrote a song that's just extremely creepy. What were your thoughts when you're going through all these documents and journals and recordings discovering this?
You're underplaying it. His feelings were, he would call them romantic. I would call them, uh, they're disgusting. They're filthy, pornographic,
Yeah.
exploitative, right? So, yes, Josh's dad, Steve Powell, had I can't even put it into words. He had a fascination and attraction to Susan, and he spent years writing about it, trying to drive a wedge between Josh and Susan. Not just a song, he wrote a literal album of songs all about his desire to be in physical proximity to Susan. He, as you said, collected her hair, her underwear, feminine hygiene products. There was a period of time early in Josh and Susan's relationship where, Josh couldn't hold a job and they got kicked out of their apartment. So they were living in his house and he was doing things like, sliding a mirror under the bathroom door to peep on Susan. He was filming her without her knowledge, basically stalking her. He knew where she worked, he knew her schedule. So he would sit in his minivan with his camcorder outside her work and film her coming and going.
Mm.
And then he would take those videos back home and he would play them and perform sex acts by himself and then write about those sex acts in his journal. The
God.
process of reading through all of that material, um, it, it's caustic. It just really erodes your faith that people are inherently good. When you find out that there are guys like Steve Powell and that you may not know them from your neighbor.
Mm.
Um, he died in 2018 as I was in the process of reporting the story. He had, as I said, served time in prison. He was out. I was trying to find him to talk to him. And the day that I found out that he died, I remember feeling this immense sense of relief
Mm.
that um, I wasn't going to have to, as a journalist, in the interest of fairness, sit there and listen to him besmirch Susan, tell a bunch of lies about her, stuff that I knew was just frankly untrue.
Right.
Um, and that's a strange place. Like as a journalist, to think I'm relieved this person is dead.
Yeah.
It was a very very difficult case to cover for that reason. Um, you know, he was just Steve Powell was victimizing every woman that he came into contact with, whether it was an adult, whether it was a child. The charges that sent him to prison were involving filming and photographing underage girls, next door neighbors, through a bathroom window. And that's just the tip of the iceberg of what he was doing. And so it's been really fascinating to me on the backside of reporting the story for the Cold Podcast to talk to listeners about the behaviors that kind of come up through the reporting that some people go, oh my gosh, I've known someone like Steve Powell.
Mm.
Or, it's like somebody like that in my own family. And how long would he have continued doing this kind of thing had Susan not disappeared? He was capable of doing a lot of harm.
Do you
Yeah,
think
sorry,
he
that's a
was?
long answer.
No, 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 no. It's interesting to hear your take. The the speculation among many is that he was either involved in Susan's disappearance or he knew more. Do you believe that he did know, he knows where she's at?
No, not at all. Josh didn't trust his dad, and you can really understand why if you go deep into the case and get to know the dynamics in this family. Josh and his dad were constantly kind of playing this power struggle game of like which one's the alpha.
Mm,
And Steve growing up, nothing that Josh did was ever good enough. And so Josh had all of these grandiose ideas as a teenager. He was going to have his own business, be a self-made millionaire, and kind of reading the undercurrent, a lot of it was just trying to get his dad's approval.
mm,
When Josh met and married Susan, suddenly he, for lack of a better term, possessed something that Steve couldn't have. And I really think that's the root of Steve's obsession with Susan, is that he was trying to take something of value away from Josh.
mm,
And Josh became aware very early, as early as 2003, so like more than 6 years before Susan disappeared, that his dad had those feelings. And not only that, that his dad had basically made a pass at Susan and that she had rejected him. And it kind of created this situation where Josh had to choose, who do you trust? Do you side with your wife or do you side with your dad? And he originally sided with Susan, but over time shifted toward his dad. When I believe Josh killed Susan, he deprived Steve, his dad, of ever possessing her the way he wanted. And it, in a way, it put Josh in this alpha position. And from that point going forward, Steve became a useful idiot for Josh. Josh could feed him misinformation, and Steve so badly wanted to believe that Susan was alive, living somewhere else, that he could someday, find her and be reunited with her, that he was willing to gobble up any kind of nonsense that Josh fed him. So I don't believe that Steve knew anything of value about where Susan ended up.
wow. Wasn't one of Josh's sisters solely on behalf of the Cox family, like kind of turned against her own family, saying that, yeah, Josh had something to do with this?
That's absolutely correct. So in Josh's family, they had three boys, two girls. You've got Josh, his brother John, his brother Michael, and then you've got sisters Jennifer and Alina. So Jennifer was the oldest, and she, from a pretty young age, when her parents split, Steve and Steve's ex-wife Terry, Jennifer sided with Terry because Steve had been abusive to the entire family, and Jennifer really kind of separated herself from her siblings and the rest of their family. She got married, she moved to Utah, she got away. The younger sister, Alina, was the complete opposite. She was the youngest. She was, daddy's girl, and she was ride or die with Steve and Josh right to the end.
Hmm.
Jennifer, as you can imagine, living here in Utah, she was actually the person that the daycare provider for the boys, Charlie and Braden, called the morning that they didn't show up for daycare. She was their emergency contact. So she, from the drop, was on Team Susan in trying to figure out what was going on. She went so far as wearing a wire, a hidden recording device, and going and confronting her brother. Just a couple of months after Susan disappeared, that was audio that we were able to surface for the first time in the Cold podcast and share. I have an immense amount of respect for Jennifer. She, I think, as you can appreciate, never wanted to be thrust into the center of this international, criminal case, and to be uh, seeing her entire family, her past life dissected in the public sphere like this. And she's really retreated in recent years from a lot of that attention. And so I'm usually pretty careful to not um, invade on that, so I don't keep up with her. But yes, she was a key figure in trying to hold Josh accountable for what he likely did to Susan.
I know that when we spoke several years ago, Dave, you mentioned this hard drive or this computer that still at that time was encrypted that belonged to Josh Powell that might have some answers. Is that still the case? Have they been able to get into that hard drive?
So, to the best of my knowledge, no. We in 2019 at the Cold Podcast published a bonus episode called Project Sunlight that was really a deep examination of the digital evidence in that case and some of the claims that were made about, whether or not Josh had possessed images of, child sexual abuse. It's been a very interesting experience the last number of years because nobody else has gone to the trouble to verify the reporting that we did. I'm to this day, I'm as confident in it as I was the day we published. I'm kind of talking in circles, but basically the police in Utah had represented to the court in Washington that they had evidence that Josh had a computer where he had downloaded, these images, child sex abuse images, and that came into the child custody case in Washington. It was grounds for the judge there telling Josh he couldn't get the kids back until he went through a psychosexual evaluation, basically figure out whether or not he had, pedophilia predilections. Josh wasn't going to do that. It was a catalyst toward the murder-suicide. The reporting that we did basically revealed that those images were not downloaded by Josh. Josh couldn't have had any knowledge of them. And the team that I was working with to do some of that digital forensics work at the time was also involved in trying to crack the encryption or find a way around, these password locks on a couple of different hard drives that Josh possessed. The reporting that I did ended up really ruffling some feathers on the part of a private investigator that works for Susan's parents, who, I believe feels that she was improperly represented in that podcast episode. I stand by the reporting, but the net effect of that was it basically disincentivized anybody from working on that encryption problem anymore. So to the best of my knowledge, nothing has really been done in 5 or 6 years on it. And from my review of it, I am highly skeptical that realistically we'll ever see that broken. Josh was smart enough to use, I think, long, complex passwords, kind of if you today like randomly generate a long password, that's what he was doing. So you're not going to find it by, picking the name of his first pet and his whatever, right? He kept a password manager that we haven't been able to break into. I still think that is maybe someday an option, but realistically, unless somebody has a couple $1 million that they want to throw at spinning up a password crack that can run for the next 1,000, 2,000, 100,000 years, we're probably not going to get there.
Not going to get in there. So when you got all this, Dave, I want to ask you on the journalism, on the journalist side. At the time, podcasts, I don't think were as huge as they are now. I don't think the true crime genre was as huge as it was now. How did you decide, I really got to go in depth with this and turn it into a podcast rather than a quick 30-second blip on the radio? And how much of your personal time were you spending doing this? Was this like every moment outside of work that you're putting this all together?
Yeah. So the tipping point for me was I was at a journalism conference, and I think it was in sometime around 2015. Serial had just landed and was like taking off. So I'd been a casual podcast listener for a lot of years, going back to when you had to find an RSS feed, download it, and sideload onto your iPod. Mm-hmm. I was listening to that kind of audio going back years and years, but this revolution, which was, hey, you've got an internet connected smartphone in your pocket, you can just download those on the fly over the air and listen. And then Serial being this kind of bingeable take on a single case was something that I think a lot of people recognized was a very new entry into this format. I was at this journalism conference, and I was listening to a print reporter from some other city talking about how she took an article that she wrote, and she worked with an audio producer, and they sat in a studio, and the audio producer asked her questions about her print story, and then they chopped that up, and that became a podcast, and how great that was. Well, I at the time was a radio reporter and producer, and I'm thinking to myself, oh, we can do way better than that. Like, I've got this Powell case that I'm crazy interested in that I'm taking home and reading just because I'm fascinated in it.
Hmm.
And I'm finding out that we have all of these recordings of the police interviews with Josh, of, you know, Jennifer, his sister, wearing this hidden wire, uh, all kinds of crazy audio that if I weave that into the narrative is really going to kind of be immersive for the listener. And so I made a pitch to my boss, my news director at the time of, you know, what if we did something crazy and we do a real deep dive podcast on the Susan Powell investigation? My boss was like, yes, but we don't have the ability to give you the time to work on it because you've got, you know, a full-time job.
Yeah.
And I told her at that point, like right at the outset, I was like, well, here's the deal. I don't work for free. So when you decide that you can pay me, then we'll talk again. And that lasted maybe a month before I'm sitting at home, you know, after work thinking, I really, I, I, I'm just too curious. Like I've got to be
Right.
back into this thing. So then it's like, yeah, reading, taking the notes, identifying what other recordings, what other documents can we chase, who can I talk to, starting to try to build some of those relationships. And that took, that took the better part of 2-3 years to even just get I'd say the ground level knowledge of the case to start building that podcast out. By the time we launched in 2018, I would disagree with you. I'd say podcasts were very much kind of in their heyday at that point.
Okay.
But the timing was really great that I think we released the first season of Cold at a moment where the Powell case had really kind of fallen off a lot of people's radar, so it felt fresh
Right.
to bring it back. And I believe we were bringing the goods with delivering, okay, here's something you've never heard before. You know, we're going to take you through this case and introduce you to people that you've not heard from, evidence that you've not seen or heard. And by the end of the story, hopefully we'll have a better understanding of, you know, what happened to Susan through all this.
And what did you think when it like exploded?
It was crazy. So the first day, because I had no idea what to expect as far as would people listen or care. I had never tried to tell a story over the course of 18 hours, right? I was a radio news guy. Usually it was 20 seconds.
Yeah.
Uh, as a writer, as a creator, I look back at that and I cringe at some of the choices that I made and think, you know, if I was doing it today, I would do it differently. That's just life. The day of our first episode hitting Apple, we start getting some metrics back and it's doing really well, like really good. And a colleague of mine, Maria Chaleos, a reporter who I've worked with for a lot of years and respect a lot, she comes up to me and she says, well, there's your life before Cold and there's your life now after Cold. And she was exactly right. That experience changed my life. It changed the trajectory of my career. Has opened a lot of opportunities to pursue other cases and tell stories that I'm deeply passionate about. And I'm grateful for that. My one regret, you know, regardless of the podcast doing well, how many downloads, all that kind of stuff, I don't really track that these days. What I kind of measure for myself, Nate, is, you know, who has it helped? This story has a way of finding people who need to hear it, especially women who are in abusive relationships, and inspiring them to find a safe pathway out to avoid being in Susan's shoes. And that, to me, if there's any legacy for the Cold podcast, I think for me, that's what I hold on to.
Yeah, that's amazing. And for those of you that have only heard the first season, as Dave mentioned, there's other cases he's covered. Can you kind of give us a brief overview of the other seasons that have come since 2018?
Yeah. So season 2 of Cold, we faced kind of this choice of, the Powell case was already somewhat known or fairly widely known, I would say, when we launched that podcast. So there's an instant, oh, I remember that case, that helps you get into it. For season 2, we chose a very overlooked story, in my opinion, and this was the 1985 disappearance of a woman named Joyce Yost. She was followed home one night by a man she had never met. He assaulted her in her own car in her own driveway, ended up abducting her, sexually assaulting her, and she managed to talk him into releasing her with a promise that she not tell the police what he had done. She did, and then before that case went to trial, he came back and murdered her, and her body's never been found. That man, Doug Lovell, has been in prison ever since 1986. He has twice been sentenced to death, and he has twice had his death sentence overturned in the courts. And so it's an ongoing case, one that we continue to follow. Season 3 is about a woman named Sheree Warren. A similar time and place, 1985 in Ogden, Utah. She's going through a divorce from her husband, Chuck Warren. She's dating a man named Kerry Hartman. And so when she disappears after leaving work one day, the question is, is it the ex-husband, kind of the Josh Powell figure who looks really suspicious, or is it this other guy on the side? And the investigators over the course of the first year and a half, 2 years, discover that the boyfriend, Kerry Hartman, he's a former reserve police officer. So he seems to be, this upstanding guy. He's got connections in the police department, but he is also a serial rapist who has been stalking women, breaking into their homes at night, assaulting them. He ended up in prison for 30 years. He got out in 2020. I confronted him, and as a result, story for another day, he's back in prison for violating his parole in that case. We've done some other spinoffs in bonus episodes. One that I'm really passionate about is the 1975 disappearance of Nancy Baird. She was long considered to be a victim of Ted Bundy, and our reporting showed that's just frankly not true. So, there's a lot of time and effort that we poured into other cases beyond the Powell case. For anyone that's listened to Cold Season 1 and doesn't realize, go back to that feed. You might find something else that you'd like to listen to.
And separate from Cold, if you are interested in Dave's storytelling, his most recent project took him to Australia, right?
And New Zealand, yeah.
Yeah.
Up in the mountains. So we launched a podcast a little earlier this year called You Went to Triangle. You Went to Triangle follows the story of a man named Eric Robinson, an Australian who came to the United States to do a solo trek across a mountain range called the Uintas. Eric started on a 10-day journey. He didn't make it to the end of the trail. And the podcast tells the story of the search for Eric and his wife, Marilyn Koolstra's, really, I would say, kind of journey internationally, involved in that search and what's happened in the years afterward. You get to meet and spend time with Marilyn, who is just a wonderful human being. It ends in a way that is both tragic and also uplifting. So I don't want to spoil it, but I'm really proud of that story, and I hope people give it a shot.
Dave, before we go, anything new on Susan Powell, and do you think she will ever be found?
So you and I have had a conversation before, Nate, about what I view as the last good lead in the case. And that is, in the days after Susan disappeared, so she disappeared on Monday, or was reported missing on Monday, Tuesday night into Wednesday, Josh Powell, he's gone for 18 hours in a rental car. Nobody knows where he is. To this day, we don't know where Josh went. He paid cash, presumably buying gas in the rental car. He bought burner phones so he couldn't be traced. And one of the things that came up through the reporting for the Cold podcast was this little notation. When the police had a wiretap on Josh and his family, they captured a phone call between Josh, his brother, his dad, where he was talking about where he went during that time. And he is lying to his family, saying, I could have gone any direction. I could have gone here or there. But he makes a comment about, there was a convenience store clerk who I would have been very memorable toward. And I believe, just based on the other evidence, that this clerk was probably somewhere in southern Idaho. along I-84. Josh, when he came back onto the grid from that 18 hours, he was coming south from Idaho into Utah. And so that really suggests that he was up in Idaho. And to my perspective on the case, the only reason he's up there is to move Susan's body away from where it might be found. So if there is hope of finding Susan, I think a lot of people focus on Utah's West Desert and the idea she's in a mine. I don't buy that at all. I think she is probably somewhere in southern Idaho. Whether or not she can be found after this amount of time, stranger things have happened.
Right.
But at this point, with the information that we have, it's very difficult to narrow it into let's go search here. It's probably going to come down to a stroke of luck, random chance of somebody stumbling upon something. So I hope that happens one day. But I have no way to predict whether that could or could not happen.
Yeah. Well, I think we all hope for that. And we hope that you're going to be the guy that breaks the story when it does
I
happen.
mean, it's funny, Nate, you've been through this experience as well of following a case that it falls in your lap. You don't expect to become the guy known for this case.
Yeah.
But over time, you feel a sense of responsibility, right? You've invested so much into reporting the case. The people that you've interviewed have invested trust in you. Your audience has invested trust in you. I feel that very deeply with the Powell case, and I intend to continue playing that role, as long as I maintain that trust with folks.
Go check out Cold. Go check out Uinta. Go check out all the podcasts. You can go to KSL Podcasts. Is it KSLpodcast.com? Is that the website, Dave?
KSLpodcast.com. Yeah, you got it.
And are you on social media? Where can people find you?
Oh, I'm places. I'm less active these days than I used to be, but definitely, Instagram is at Dave_Cawley, Cawley. Follow the shows at the Cold Podcast and at Uinta Triangle is a really great way to interact with me and kind of talk about those shows.
Thank you very much, Dave. Big thanks to Dave. I know many of you are saying, why didn't you talk for another hour? He had things to do. He's a busy guy, but we'll hopefully have him on again. And I appreciate all that he shared with us. And you got to check out the podcast if you haven't heard it. And some of the other series, they do good work at KSL Podcasts. So thanks, Dave. Good having you here. Thanks to newspapers.com, our sponsor, who really lets you get an inside look at the history. It was fascinating. Yesterday we had on Elizabeth Smart and going through some of the old stories about her disappearance and when she was found, reading what the newspapers at the time were reporting in real time versus what we know now. A lot of stuff the same, but some things change because you report what you know at the time and then things change. And it's the exact same with the Susan and Josh Powell case. You can check it all out at newspapers.com. We appreciate them sponsoring us here at Courtroom Insider. We thank you for watching too. Here's where you can find me and keep up with me. I'm on Facebook. I'm on Instagram. I'm on X. You can see me there. And I'm also on YouTube, which is probably where you're watching us tonight. If you haven't subscribed to our channel, would love to have that subscribe button. And many of you want, real quick, yes, we still have a couple of mugs left and shirts. Our crime shirts have been doing really hot. I counted this morning. I think we had like 30 left. So now's the perfect time to order them. We package them ourselves. If you go to eastidahonews.com/shop, SHOP, order it. We'll get it to you. If you order it this weekend, by this weekend, you should get it by Christmas. So if you wait till next week, might be a little dicey, but feel free to grab your East Idaho News swag. And we have a bunch of crime shirts on there that I think you'll enjoy. And our mugshot shirts too. Keep my mugshot off eastidahonews.com. We're off tomorrow. But we'll be back. We'll be back soon with some more fun, interesting Courtroom Insiders. Thank you all for watching tonight. I hope you have a great weekend. I'm Nate Eaton. Take care.